All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So, this episode here has kind of been a long time coming. I know last time we did a little bit of a March Madness and basketball preview, but um, kind of the genesis of and the origin of what this episode and podcast is going to be about. So, I'm with my brother Toe, as I'm sure all of you know. Um, yeah, so we've been kind of discussing, and we have conversations just talking about life, about society, about our generation and human nature in general. And I think what we wanted to do is kind of put together a podcast or pretty much just press record and see where this goes. So a lot of this is going to be unscripted. We don't really have a lot of plans that are pretty much written down, but I think we have a lot to share and pretty much a lot to go over, just talking about life. So, yeah, So thank you for joining me. Is there anything else that you want to add in that little bit?
Yeah, no, I think you covered it well. I think the main thing that we've thought about and kind of talked at length about too is just, as we have more of these discussions and kind of like peel back the layers of not only human nature, but just like kind of society at large, I think we realize that there's a lack of like authenticity and like genuine conversation, either in social media or in like real life, on how I think especially kind of kids our age and we're in our 20s, like very chaotic, but then also like it's like a lot of new emotions and things that we are dealing with, and I think like especially guys, I feel like do a pretty bad job of like voicing them and trying to like work through. So I think like, and Benny and I have these conversations all the time. So I think we're just trying to like give you know have some sort of platform where we can kind of discuss things that I think a lot of people do think about, but not necessarily like have the conversations with other people. So I think to Ben's point, like these are going to be pretty free flowing and not really scripted. But I think generally we're trying to just figure out like of the problems that we are currently going through. Us like very specifically, but like I think broader people. We're trying to figure out like kind of the truth and how we can figure out and use that to kind of better our lives and better our minds.
Yeah, and just kind of going off like what you just mentioned with truth and within these conversations, like we're going to be honest. We're going to say things that aren't socially acceptable at times. But I think it's authentic, it's real, it's raw. And I think that's kind of been the origin of like what we wanted to share with our audience here or whoever is out there listening. But yeah, so I guess to begin with that framework in mind of like maybe our generation, folks our age, what are kind of, I guess to start at a broad perspective, what are, I guess, some things that you've noticed over the past 6 months or just in general? What do you notice of, not like some shortcomings of society, but is there anything that comes to mind with, I guess, your experience or just things that you can see to kind of start us off?
Yeah, I think I would say like like at our point in our stage in lives, like we have pretty like minimal responsibilities like outside of our jobs, and I think like we are very I live in a New York, very like populated, filled with 20-year-olds, like very like kind of chaotic but like also energetic society, and I think like it's very easy to like what I call this like being in a rut, like when your routine is like kind of largely planned out. You have like friends, or like your social life is like pretty well kept. Like I think it's very easy to like fall in a routine, and I think where people like kind of fall into traps, myself included, is like because you're surrounded by like not necessarily like your friends, but like your peers. It's really easy to just follow the crowd and like figure out like, oh, if somebody wants to do this, like sure, I'll do it, and like without thinking it. And I think you end up losing like a lot of not necessarily uniqueness, but like I think it's harder to cultivate like what you truly are passionate about. And I think your best performance in life and your best like the things you're going to do well are the things that you are genuinely passionate about. And I think not necessarily like I don't think people are like creative, not creative, but like kind of willing to experiment different things and willing to say no about certain things, just to kind of follow the crowd. I think essentially, I think like people need to kind of explore kind of what they are passionate about. And I feel like we live in a very homogenized society. where it's very easy to follow what like the crowds are doing, and like that is kind of cliche at a certain point. But I think like underlying it is trying to figure out what you truly are passionate about.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good starting point but so correct me if I'm wrong. So I guess what you're saying is like in life and with our job and outside of our job with like friends, family, experiences, and like as an active member in society, we kind of will get caught up on like the hamster wheel or you'll just get caught up in the swing of things, and therefore it's difficult to prioritize what you want, figuring out what you want to begin with, and like you mentioned, cultivating what you're talented, like what you are passionate about, your talents and things that you want to pursue. So I think you see it in the creator space about people kind of taking the leap. Maybe it's a quantum leap, but I think for the everyday folks and people like you and me, sometimes it's kind of hard to, I guess, be able to jump off that ship. And because like within society and within friends, it's difficult to kind of overcome those patterns and to say no in some instances, or like whatever the case is. But yeah, I guess, does that kind of make sense? Like where I'm picking up from you?
Yeah, yeah. And I think like I think it really just starts with like intrinsic motivation. And I think a lot of it, like, I feel like a lot of the creator space now is like people, especially like the motivational side of it, is like kind of like nuggets or like guides or kind of like cookie cutter advice to accomplishing things, but they're like a little light on the specifics of like what to actually do. And I think like it's fun because, you know, at work or like, you know, you have like an icebreaker with like a new employee and they're like, oh, what do you like to do? And, you know, it's like, oh, I like to hang out with friends. I like to travel, I like to listen to music, I like to watch movies, like sports. And you're like, yeah, like I do like those things. But I think like truly figuring out like what you're passionate about and like what drives you as a person, and then not from like, oh, this is some advice somebody told me, and now this is kind of like how I subscribe to my life. I think like being a little selfish and trying to figure out what is best for me, and not even in like a long-term perspective, but just figuring out like, I think what you truly like to do is something that we get asked all the time, but I don't think a lot of people really spend time and reflect on themselves and try to figure out like, all right, in my day-to-day life, how like often do I spend my day doing what I truly want to do? And this is like, you know, not even like work, but like on the weekends, right? Like, I think you kind of get like, and this is like, I don't know, I've kind of like thought about like socialization, like at large, because, you know, I think of myself a pretty outgoing person. I like to hang out with my friends. I have like a large group of friends who I live with as well. But it's funny, like when you do socialize, it's like, I was talking with one of my friends like earlier this week, and like when you're in certain like social environments, like it's a very like surface level interaction, even like with your friends. Like I was joking with her, and I was like, I don't know what you do like outside of work. We've been friends for 2 years, but it's like so many of your interactions are just like kind of like quick small talk that takes like, that is how, the majority of the time you spend socializing is small talk. And like and I'm not saying like small talk's bad. Like you do need, you know, icebreakers or just like if you're having a quick chat with someone. But I feel like so much of what people enjoy about going out is like hanging out with people. And I feel like how you're spending your time with those people is really lost. And then it's not like there should be a goal or motivation, but it's like, I feel like there needs to be better conversations around, I don't know, like people, right? That was kind of
No, that's fine. I mean, there's kind of a lot of avenues that I wanted to pick up there, but starting with that last point, what I've noticed, especially on the socialization factor, is you kind of mentioned like those mindless, like surface level talks that you have with people. And I think by human nature, when you're put in a place where typically when you're in a group or you're with like a crowd or whatever the case is, there's like a certain subconscious posturing involved of when you're interacting with those kind of groups or in those kind of environments, you're kind of tossing like you're in a way you're like kind of clocking in and putting your mask of routine, totally. Like you're putting your mask of routine at work, So you kind of go over the same jokes, say the same things, and
Yeah.
kind of.
I mean, how many times have you been in? Sorry, go
Well,
on.
I mean, the thing is like you're not just going to talk to like a friend of a couple months and just like dive into like a super deep conversation unless there's some reciprocity, unless you have like a certain dance partner like this forum able to do so. But it's not a fault of like society or other people or like even us. It's just I think that's just the nature of humans. Like you're not gonna you're not gonna go into like some super deep or the environment is not going to allow for the conversation to reach a certain depth. So I think a one-on-one forum is probably the best way to really extract the honesty and genuineness out of someone. And yeah, I mean, those were, I guess, some of the thoughts that I had of what you just described. And to kind of maybe lead this another direction, you kind of mentioned intent and figuring out what drives, I guess, an individual. And I know there was kind of a concept that I introduced you to over the past year of the concept of sincerity. And I've been writing about that a lot. And I think sincerity, the way I describe it, is the true, uncorrupted, genuine motivation that allows you to take action. And so kind of what you mentioned about people that don't really know what they like or wanting to do things that they enjoy or that they're talented outside of work, I think it's less of figuring out what that is, but what is it that you naturally find yourself doing without thinking about it? Like, do you write something? Do you like spending time on social media? Do you like marketing? Do you like fashion? Like whatever. It's not a forced action. It's just something that naturally spawns within yourself to be able to do.
Yeah. And I do want to kind of like double click into sincerity because I think that is kind of our basis for a lot of our thinking and also just like our perspective on life at large. And I think like, sincerity in my like, how about I'm going to kind of give my definition of what I think it is and then you want to give your definition?
Yeah. I mean, I already described
because like, oh yeah, that's fair.
No, go ahead though.
But like how I view it is like, so like I think a lot of people are like familiar, especially if you played sports, with like the flow state of like when you're just not thinking, right? And I don't think sincerity like is necessarily all of that, but I think there are some ingredients of the flow state that like encompasses what we mean by sincerity. Is like, and to bring it back to like conversations too, is like there's so many times I feel like I have conversations with people and then like in the back of my head, I'm already thinking about like what I'm going to say next, right? I'm not even, you kind of like, you're zoning out and don't even know it, right? So you're not even listening. You're just trying to think of like in your head what you're about to say. And I think like that's kind of the opposite of sincerity because like sincerity should be like to be as present as possible. You're ingesting information, you're ingesting the world as pure as possible. And then your response, a mission out is again like it's not even thought about. It's just how you act, and that can be good or bad. But it's just like being in that state, and I think is like ideally where you really want to find yourself, because I think like that is your most natural state as a person, right? It's like when you're not thinking, when you're in this state, and like so I think when I view of sincerity, it's trying to figure out like how can I want to like operate and run through life like by being in this state, right? Like I do not want to think about like, oh, what does somebody think about me if I say this? Is this going to be weird? Should I do this? Like, and it's not like you block off these thoughts, but I think the importance of sincerity is like figuring out like what you are sincere about, because again, like those are your most natural thoughts and actions, and B, like how can I then cultivate this into something larger?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the issues I have with, I guess, what you were saying is I think genuineness can kind of spawn those like zone or flow state feelings, but I think they're two separate things, to be completely honest. So what you were describing with like the flow state and kind of what you see within sports, within pretty much any realm, it's essentially the state of no mind. And it's just like you were saying, it's physically being in the present, physically and just like wholeheartedly being in the present moment. And that is the natural state of bliss and peace within a human being. I remember an interesting question that I heard is, when are the times that you are most at peace? And the answer to that question, it's the same for everyone, to be honest. It's when you're not with yourself. It's a paradox. It's when you are like when you're with a crowd and you're kind of having those conversations when you already know what you're going to say in a way that's like not sincere because you have that mask and you kind of have a fabricated artificial response of what you should say to come up next. It's not pure. And so I guess in a way, sincerity and the flow state, they do kind of go hand in hand where, yeah, I mean, those things within like no minds, it's not a state that you should chase though. Like if you're trying to chase that state of like bliss or peace or the zone, like that in and of itself is like not sincere. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. I think that's a good clarification is like, you can't chase sincerity, right? Like that's something that's just like very innate. And I think like the goal of like, kind of like what I'm trying to say is like, I think people need to be more cognizant of like of when they feel like they are being sincere and when they're not. And I think a lot of it is like a lot of reflection, but a lot of it is also like, and it kind of brings back to our earlier point of like figuring out truly what you want to do, right? Like again, it sounds like a very simple question, but I think like I think people really spend way too much time doing things they do not want to do, and that elicits like it's not a sincere, like you're not doing it like from a like you might be like very genuine and like authentic in the moment, but like I don't think that is the core of what you want to be doing. So I think like figuring out these things and what these things could be also is like, I don't know, like playing an instrument, or like I like being by myself. I like listening to podcasts. Like I think just ingesting only like information. I think like social media also is like why I think this is lost on a lot of people is like we shouldn't be ingesting so many different things of information, right? You should only focus on the things that like you really care about. Like there's this great book by like Cal Newport. It's called like Digital Minimalism, and he's like essentially saying like you should only use technology for very, very precise like things, right? Like if you use Twitter, you should only curate your content to exactly what you want to see. If you Instagram, like I get it, you want to follow what people are doing, but like figure out like why do you really like Instagram? Like why are you on these things? And I think like once you start to have more of these internal conversations of not just social media, but like then the things you do outside of it, you then sharpen your focus on the things you do care about, the things you do are sincere about. And then once you find those things, you realize all the shit you're doing in the past, like it's a ginormous waste of time. Like it's a classic example. Like if you ever delete your social media for a week, you don't look at it at all. You don't even think about it afterwards. You're like, God, why do I use this? Like, and I think more people need to like truly understand, like not necessarily social media, like I said, but like figuring out things in your day-to-day life, because you're just wasting time, right? You're completely wasting time if you're wasting your mind on things that you don't care about, you're not sincere about.
Yeah, I don't think it's only limited to social media, and obviously I think our generation, like I remember seeing like my friends, like when you have the weekly recap on your iPhone of like your screen time, I remember like just being blown away at like the number of hours that people spend on their phone, and in reality, a lot of it is scrolling through social media and just doing mindless things. And the implication there is like, that's not bad by any means. It's a monumental waste of time. And if you're truly honest with yourself, you will notice that pretty much everything else in your day to day, a lot of it is kind of a waste of time. And if you're I think the issue with figuring out what you want, it's like not, I would argue like almost no one knows what they want. I certainly don't know what I want. I don't know about you. I don't think we've kind of discussed it in a while, but
I agree.
The mere fact that like you can like, that's the issue I kind of have with some of these like flippant questions that people have. It's just like, they don't understand what they're asking or what they're telling someone. When you say like, oh, like, what do you want? I think that in of itself is a little bit different, because in the end, I think human beings get everything that they want. And the reason being is because if you don't have something, it's because you did truly want it. And everything that you have in your life, for the most part, is because you desperately could not live without it. And so,
I would push back on that. Like, I don't think, like, I see what you're saying. I think, like, I don't know. It's different because I think, like, materially, I think that's where you're wrong, right? Like, I think people, like, when you just buy shit, like clothes, whatever, a laptop, a phone, AirPods, like, it's not because you desperately could not live without it, right? It's like, oh, I thought this was cool. Like, but I think, like,
you still made the purchase, though.
experience, like, right. But, like, I think,
So, in and of itself,
I don't know. It's like,
the desperation adjective is not applicable there, but I think that's kind of proving, not that it's proving my point, but I think it's like you purchased said item, therefore you hypothetically couldn't live without it. And I think it's less about that. Do you have something else to add there? Because I have a,
no, keep going.
so I guess on top of that, like, I've had like a super big fascination with, ever since I stopped playing basketball or just sports competitively, I spent a ton of time reflecting upon great performers and the people that are the best of the best in their craft. And I think when you take an average person that first starts out in a craft or any sort of domain, you obviously do need repetition and you need a number of hard work to kind of get you to a certain point. But when you're talking about people at a professional level or people that are trying to separate themselves by a minuscule amount, hard work's not really going to do it. There needs to be some sort of genesis to transform or push someone to be able to allow themselves to go through a certain transformation. And that's where I think the sincerity comes in. But I think what I wanted to allude to is when like the certain questions that people say, like, are like, for example, in golf, if someone's having a bad round or is not hitting the shots that they think they're capable of hitting, when someone just says, oh, you're thinking too much or you should stop thinking, I just think that is the most flippant and just ridiculous thing to say to someone, because no one in the history that is not, the only way that you can stop your mind is if you truly and desperately want to attain enlightenment. And if you're not in that camp, which is, I would say, 99.99% of humanity, there's no possible way you can stop like the incessant barking of your mind. It's just, there's no way. It's just, it's a completely insincere and just like ridiculous thing to say to someone, to think that they have the ability to just turn off the light switch on thinking.
Yeah. And I think, like, you know, I don't think, like, they're necessarily that kind of sincere of, like, maybe not sincere is the right word, but, like,
I mean, obviously,
I don't think they stress, like, you know,
yeah,
turn off your mind. Like, I think it's, like, to lower your level of thinking.
Yeah.
But again, like, I think the point does remain, like, again, it's like, and then we can kind of get into, like, prescriptions too. I think that would be interesting, but it's like, it's just like a prescription as well. It's like, these things are like pieces of advice that either A, you're going to forget, like, I'm trying, like, to your point of, like,
can we start off before,
if you're trying
I don't mean to cut you off. Can we start off by defining like what is a prescription within society?
Sure. Yeah. So I think, like, a prescription is anything. So to your point, like, if you want to get better at something, and it's like a piece of advice where it's like, so you should stop thinking, right? Or you should control your, it's just like it's prescriptive type thinking. So you're saying, like, this is the answer, or this is advice that I think you should follow so you can, you know, attain marginal improvement and get better at something. Is there something you wanted to add?
So the way I see it, I mean, it's all in the same vein, but essentially prescriptions are how-tos. They are hacks, methods, processes, any sort of methodology that is cleverly trying to get you from point A to point B. And our entire lives within society, everything is fabricated and built upon these prescriptions. And for mechanical things like turning on a light switch, um, turning on a computer, like these things, prescriptions work. But the thing is like when you venture into things that are a little bit arbitrary, like an art, a craft, or domain, a sport, there's a sort of like murky affair involved where prescriptions just do not work whatsoever. And the reason they don't work is because you see all of these books, you see all of these podcasts, you see all these audiobooks and all this information that we have from the very best in the world, writers, artists, musicians, sportsmen, businessmen. They have these routines, they have these certain like methods, hacks, and prescriptions that they just don't work, because if they did work, you would see thousands of Michael Jordans on the side of the road. You would see Michelangelos, you would see Picassos, you would see Warren Buffett's everywhere on every street, like street corner. And that's just not the case.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like prescriptions are like very short-term solutions, right? And there's also a fallacy in thinking like for example, I think, we've talked about meditation when you're like, this is how I meditate. And there's somebody's like, this is how I meditate. You should do this. And the fact of the matter is like, just because something works for somebody else does not mean at all that it works for you. And trying to align yourself, or like a routine, for example, where you're like, all right, Michael Jordan wakes up at 4 a.m. Kobe wakes up at 4 a.m. I should wake up at 4 a.m. Like, if that's not what you truly want to do, it's a waste of your time, right? So like, and that's what all prescriptions are, is like, they need to come from like something that's innate, something that like you are passionate about, because they're either going to be short term, where you do it up until a point and then it starts to erode, or B, it's just not even going to work in the first place because it doesn't come out of sincerity. So I think like I would just caution to say is like, be careful the amount of prescriptions that exist in our universe. And, I blindly follow them too sometimes, like we're all guilty of it. But I think like being aware of like A, giving out advice, and B, like receiving it as well. Because I think these things are very short term, and they also just because they work for somebody else does not mean that that is the truth. This is how you should do something. To your point, like for mechanical things, like learning how to code, learning how to build something that like how-tos, where you could like, how do I change a tire? Like they work great because there is a goal in mind. There's a destination that you want to get to. And then once you complete that, great, the how-to work. For things that are very arbitrary, like how do I get better at piano? Or how do I think better? How am I more present? Like these things like don't necessarily have an end goal. So doing prescriptions to try to get to the end goal is a complete waste of time.
It's a chase. And if you go down the route of improvement, right, of trying to do better, like first of all, it's an arbitrary ask, and it's building upon like an artificial self-image. It's building upon that mask that we kind of discussed of like, you by nature just want to gain self-acceptance, and you're trying at some level you're trying to build a mental image that again is accepted within you and by society. So I think those are like where the fallacies start to kind of embed yourselves with prescriptions and betterment and improvement and things like that. But I guess I posed the question of like things that have surprised you, or like things that you noticed over the past year, 6 months. For me, it's like the severity and the omnipotence of like all these prescriptions and all of these things in everyday society, where I kind of noticed myself when I was exposed to truth and I started listening to other podcasts or other things from very incredibly successful people, billionaires, successful athletes, best authors, musicians, things like that. I kind of realized like a lot of like pretty much everything what they were saying was like not false, but like by nature it's prescriptive and it's not true. So like I mentioned, like when you're exposed to truth, like why would you waste your time with anything else?
100%. And I think it's very easy to think like, all right, I want to be successful. I should look up to people who are successful. I should see what they're doing and I should follow what they're doing. And the fact of the matter is, like, for example, like Roger Federer, like, I don't think anybody like if you asked him like if you start your life over, I guarantee you it would be vastly different than his life currently is. Like the greats are like people who like think like very thoughtfully and introspectively and like are considered world class. Like they don't do things like they don't live their life by prescriptive basis. They live them by like sincerity and passion. And I think like to your point, once you realize like the amount of gurus or YouTube videos where you're trying to like learn things and you're like, I don't think people are, like trying to impart like poor advice or like, I think there are, channels where people are generally trying to get other people to be better. Like, I don't think it's any malevolent thinking, but it's just, I would just caution that it's a very dangerous thing to subscribe to because also it's very easily, in our, Kapul, guy we both listen to a lot, like he says like, it's very easy to like, become a slave to some prescriptions or become a slave to your work or like your day-to-day routine. Right. And I think like trying to avoid those as best as possible is the more like it's just a better path.
Yeah. First of all, shout out to Dr. Kapil Gupta. Definitely a big fan. But I think when you mentioned about success, about let's say you do want to be successful, like first of all, that's like an arbitrary, like what does that even mean? It's gonna be a different meaning to everyone else. Like it's going to be a different acute destination for every single person. And on top of that, some things that I'm beginning to ask myself is like, why do you want to be successful? Like, what's the point? Like, why do you need like a lot of money? Like, why do you need to be in shape? Like, what? I think asking the why questions to those already established societal norms of like already expected, like, I think in today's society, we see like a bunch of, especially like in the male and like masculine realm of podcasts and things like that. It's like, oh, we need to push masculinity. We need to be the best male that we can possibly be. But like, I think the interesting question is like, why do you feel the need to do so? And not that you should, not that you shouldn't. Don't care. But it's just an interesting exploration and reflection to go down that route where at the end of the day, if you don't have that that necessary reflection, by nature, it's going to be because you are seeking some sort of validation, whether it's from yourself, whether it's from other people, whether it's from women, whether it's from society. There's some sort of, in trading, there's like a composite man, like they say, where that pretty much affects the ebbs and flows and waves of a market. That's kind of how I view society. It's just like the composite man of the influence and the greater tide of how it pushes you along.
Yeah, I think you said a lot of great stuff there. I think I just want to go back to like the why, because I think when you do start to have that reflection of like, why do I do this? Why do I want money? Why do I, why do I want to hang out with my friends? Why do I want to go drinking? Like, and again, and I think it's funny because when you do kind of have that like mental exercise, you start thinking things in like good and bad sense, right? Like, all right, I want to go drink with my friends because like makes me feel like good, or I want to like, I don't know, I want to buy a nice watch. And it's like, why? But then it's like, oh, I don't want to like wear a nice watch because then it looks douche. You're like, but the fact of the matter is like, it's not like these things are like, I think we view things in a very binary sense of like, is this decision good or is it bad? And when you view good or bad, your viewpoint is always like from the outside looking in of like, how do people view me? And even if it's not in that sense, right? Like it's from a societal level, like how does society accept this? Like, should I pay my taxes? Like, now that's like, a good thing, for example, but like other things that are a little more obfuscated, like, I don't know, should I stay up until 2 a.m. and play video games when I know I've worked the next day. Like, that's probably not the best idea, but like that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It might not be healthy, right? It might not like encourage long-term like success or habits, but like it's not necessarily bad, right? Like eating junk food, yeah, it's like not healthy, but it's not necessarily like bad. Like I think people view, and you know, you could say the same thing with like good things too. Like I think we get into this like, especially like on reflecting or your decision making at large. I think we view things in a very like binary good or bad sense, and I don't think like we don't live in a world where we're not like now that you have like your moral compass, right? But like who discerns what's good or bad for you, right? Like so, I think it's like I think it's very tricky to get too warped up in what on the result or the labeling of your decision making, because the fact of the matter, like the person who knows what's good or bad for you is yourself, right? Like, so as long as you're like in tune to how you were feeling and your thoughts and your reflections, like that's how you should view your decisions and view your actions and motives. Not that's from a good or bad sense. And I think when you start asking the why questions about why you do certain things, it's important to kind of make that distinction.
Yeah, I mean, I
You disagree?
no, I'm just thinking. Sorry, just in like Western society,
No, no worries.
especially in the U.S., I think culturally we're deemed as kind of like a policeman or like the arbiter of good and bad, right and wrong. When in actuality, I don't think it exists. To be honest, everyone has their own view, their viewpoint on that. But truthfully, I don't think it doesn't exist. But yet we do, like you mentioned, we kind of view something like, oh, I spent too much money at the bar last night, so that's a bad thing. Or I guess kind of also what you mentioned with like, if I want to stay up and play video games, eat junk food, spend money on things that I shouldn't spend money on, the greatest desire is always going to win. So whether you may not verbalize it or not, just by your mere action or mindless action of doing something shows, therefore, like you quote unquote couldn't live without it, which is being a little bit binary. But I think the lens of good and bad and right and wrong is like a good chunk of how we perform our lives. And I think it's kind of mindless and it's automatic in a way of how we frame it, to be honest. And I notice myself, I've done that a good chunk of my life, and now I don't really view it in that lens. But at the end of the day, obviously everyone's going to have a moral compass, like you mentioned. But as you kind of see, like the hysteria and the confusion and just like the mania and the lore that goes on in society, society is the composite man that dictates and is quote unquote the arbiter of good and bad. And you can never be good and you can never be bad. It's just, it's a bottomless pit to go through.
Right. You're just like, you're treading, if you're treading in life, if you're living your life by how, like, if these are good or bad decisions, right? Like, I think we want to live in this world where, like, our thoughts and actions, like, have very direct impacts and direct results on, like, what we do. But the fact of the matter is all of our decision making really does not on, like, a long, like, in a very vacuum, right? And I think, to your point, like, if you, and I think we do this kind of inherently, is we do view things like through the judgment of other people, of like, is this a good decision by society standards? But it's like, that should not dictate your decisions. And it's not like I condone staying up late and playing video games or like eating junk food all the time, because like, that is not like, I understand from where I want to go, like those are like unhealthy things to do, right? And like those are not what I sincerely want to do at times. Sometimes they are, which is why I had Taco Bell last week. But like, I think the important thing is like when you are asking like the why question is like trying to figure out what is best for you, and like truly like I think it sounds bad, but I don't think people like are selfish enough and like don't think about themselves enough. And I don't mean it like. Let me explain, but like, I just don't think people really think about their own actions like at all. I think like there's a lot of group think and a lot of group like action. I think where, you know, we're supposed to get a job and then hang out with our friends and live our life and do that for the next 40 years. And it's like, why? Right? It's, I don't know, like you want to make money, sustain a family, but like, have you actually thought about these things, right? Like, do you want to have a family one day? Do you like living in the United States? Do you like, I think, so to go back to the selfishness is like, I think it's not necessarily selfish, but I think more people need like to spend solitary, like just time with themselves and time to reflect and time to think about what they truly want and trying to like figure out what you like and don't like and not what's good or bad or how you should or should not do things, right? It's just what are you passionate about? And I think like when I say selfishness, it's like try to have like more individuality of like what do you truly want to do, right? Because then that completely changes your decision making where you don't have to care about and you don't even think about what society thinks or how if this is a good or bad decision because at the end of the day it's yours, right? And like I think people need to be more cognizant about that.
Yeah, I would agree with that for the most part. The thing about like the issue, I guess, when you kind of ride the waves of society and with the reflection of your own life and your own actions, the reason I guess you kind of do these things is because you pretty much you value the opinion of society. And the reason and evidence behind that is because if you truly didn't, your actions would speak otherwise. You may say things retrospectively that you might not think so, but every person values society. I value society for as much as I write about how shitty it is, but it's not me to make it's who cares if I make a judgment on society? It's about, like, for example, if you, let's say you have like some mud on your hands, so to speak, and if I see your hands and I see they're covered in mud, and I'd be like, hey, your hands are covered in mud. Like you need to wipe that off. And if I give you that kind of knowledge, you're not going to do any, like, if you don't believe like what I'm saying or whatever the case is, you're not going to listen to me. You're just going to be like, oh, piss off. You need to, it's for you to figure out and understand and see society for what it is. You need to see like, oh, this is mud. This is dirty. And therefore, based upon that knowledge and that understanding, you are then able to wipe your hands clean.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think like,
so what I'm trying to say is like, it's about the understanding and the knowledge to figure out what it is you truly like, what it is you truly want and what you truly value. And if you place that on a pedestal higher than society, if you truly do so, your actions will reflect that. And I think it's a rare person to be able to combat society and give society the burden and kind of walk their own path. The rareness of an individual is not really understood. Like how, like, I guess, does that make sense?
How do you mean? No, go on.
Sorry, I'm trying to phrase this in a correct manner.
No, you're good.
So the idea of like, let's say someone that like, I guess, crosses their back to society, or we'll call this like a rare individual. Like the idea of finding someone that is a rare individual is just like not comprehended and understood in life. One sec. Ollie's kind of whining, but does that, I guess, kind of make sense? I'm not doing a great job of articulating, I guess, what I'm saying, but the rareness of an individual is not comprehended by society. Like we truly don't understand like how serendipitous it is to find someone like that. Like,
yeah, no, I totally agree. And like, you wrote an article about, like why aren't there more Michael Jordans or Elon Musks? And I think like Elon's a great kind of sample size into like being smart or being hardworking or being persistent. We're going solo, folks. Like there are plenty of people who check all of those boxes, right? And I think like what makes like Elon unique is like he looks at society and he's like, how can we do this better? Or like, what are we missing here? Like, why aren't cars electric? Like, why don't people in Africa have internet? Why? Like, and it takes a rare individual to look at things that society deems as consensus and that we kind of don't think much about. We're like, oh, this is like the cars are driving on the right side of the street. This is why we do like, but you never really like think about why that is, right? We just kind of like go with it because that's how society has always been in the U.S., right? But like, and I think zoomed out, that version looks like how many things in your life are you kind of just run in your routine or you don't think about because like that's what everybody does, right? But I don't think what the point I'm trying to make is like you need to think like if for good or bad, they're not even like good or bad, but like just do your own thinking on like why do you do these things or why does society value these things, right? Because like that's where innovation comes from. That's where something truly rare and unique comes from. And I think like that's why I'm a fan of Elon. It's like, and you know, this is not even from like a personality standpoint. Like this is just truly like this is a guy who looks at society and thinks, how can I make this better? And how can I make myself better? Like how can we be better people as a society? And I think like viewing things in a more critical lens instead of an accepting lens is the way you get through that, or to that point.
Yeah, I think there were some interesting points there, and honestly, I think like I guess Elon does get a lot of hate just for some reason. I have no idea why. To be completely honest, it's only the mere fact that he has money. I think that people dislike him, but yeah, I mean, here's the thing. It's like what we're saying here. It's not that people should find. It's like people can do whatever they want. There is no should. There is no should nots. In my opinion, that is. So if you don't want to like, I mean, not that we're giving out advice by any means, but the only way I guess that you can like attain great things in your life is if you reach a certain level. Some people like to say rock bottom. I don't. If you reach a certain level of desperation or uncomfortability to be able to then decide that you cannot live like this any longer. That's the only way someone can make a change. And not that you should, it's just I think that's the truth is people are 11th hour creatures. They only act if like people have a gun pointed to their head. Like there's, like I mentioned, kind of that example with the mud on your hands, just because I say something to you that might be logical to me, that I think is harmful for you, you might not see. The only way you can change is for you to see it through your own lens.
Totally. And I think like, you know, I feel like that's why rock bottom is kind of like this cliche thing, but I think that's why it is, because it is the last point of desperation for a lot of people where people realize that they have to make substantive changes to their life. And I think, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're trying to say is like, it doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, at that point, but it does have to be, it can't just be something that like on a whim, oh, I'm going to do this because I think, you know, no, I'm going to do sober February because I think it'll be healthy. It's like, if you don't truly like believe in it, then why are you doing it? Right. And I think, I kind of lost my train of thought there.
No, I mean, you're fine. I guess I think what you were trying to say is like, if you don't truly believe in something, you're just kind of doing it to run through the motions or doing it because society tells you to do so. There needs to be like we kind of mentioned when we started out this podcast or episode talking about someone that's kind of in a rut. So when you're in a rut, it takes a lot for you to like get hit in the chin or of life to kind of like hit you or do something like an earthquake to kind of have you like shake and realize that you're off course. And I guess his mom likes to say like the world will whisper and whisper to you and then it'll scream at you. And so it's kind of just like the point of like when you hear the screams and you can like feel it within your bones that something needs to change. Like that's what I would call like a necessary level of like desperation to change action or change course.
Yeah. And I think like what we're trying to say too is like, it's not like you need to get to rock bottom to feel these things or to think about these things or to course correct. And you might be on the right course, but have you thought about it? Right? Like, it's not, I don't think we're even saying this in like a good or bad sense, but I think like there is a waking up, like, genesis that needs to occur in people of like, and it's not, it doesn't necessarily have to be a course correction, but there does need to be some, I think, like, deeper reflection into the things that you are trying to do or that you want to do. And I think like that's our goal out of all of this, right? Is like, and I think that's why we want to have these conversations, right? Is because it gets you thinking about these things. And these are, very, sometimes ambiguous, sometimes like arbitrary conversations and things that we're talking about. But I think it's like the only way that you are going to course correct or figure out what you truly want to do is through thinking about them, is to have some internal reflection, is to have deep conversations. Because without that, you are going to be in a rut. You are going to keep just doing things because like everybody else does these things. And I think like that again is like our goal is it's not necessarily for like a good result or a bad result, but there does need to be some sort of like thinking to achieve like the things that you want and you think you're capable of.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it just comes down to like understanding, awareness, not intellectual knowledge, but there needs to be some sort of reflection or honest exploration within yourself, because the fact of the matter is like you have people that just like go through years and their entire lives, like just like if you wake up like 7 a.m., go to work at 8, come back home at like 5, 6, eat dinner, spend time with your family, you don't really have a lot of time for reflection. And the thing is like, that's how society kind of sweeps you up and how you just become a victim, or not like a victim, but how you just get swept up by society. And it does kind of take a rare individual to say no to like what society says and be able to reflect upon themselves and figure out like what's going on, like what, not why. I don't know if why are you here is like the right question, but it's just unpacking the truth about your existence, about your life, and about what you want to accomplish. And in reality, it's like, where do you want to go? And I think that's kind of like a good beginning segue to kind of conclude here. At the end of the day, I mean, I think we can kind of go into this in future podcasts, but those prescriptions and those how-tos, they all kind of say like, oh, it's about the journey. It's about the destination. The destination never ends and you have to trust the process. And it's just, dude, that's all bullshit, man. None of it is true. It is 100% about the destination. Like the thing is, it's like, let's say it's Friday right now and it looks like you might have plans after this. And let's say you go outside and I just tell you, just go outside, just go walk. All right. Well, where am I going to walk? No. Just go walk like 20 steps. Like it's those kind of things where it's like foolish to think like you go outside and you don't have like a place to go. Like you get in your car and obviously there might be times where you just kind of drive around, but you almost always have a place to go and a place to end up. And so I think that's kind of a good place where we can kind of conclude here.
Yeah, I mean, I think something real quick, because I think it's an interesting conversation. I know it's something that we'll get into later podcasts, but like the goal, when you have like goals and you're setting them, like it doesn't matter. Like the journey really does not matter at all. The idea of setting goals is to finish the goals, right? Is to complete things. Like I don't think people, like so much to your point, is like obsessed over the journey. And it's like, clearly if you have a goal, there is some sort of journey. Like at the bare minimum, you are going to have to work to achieve something, right? But at the end of the day, like you want the achievement. I think like there's been a loss in law, like we haven't stressed as like, I think as a society of like, we don't want to be like a results driven people, because sometimes like for certain things, like, you should not focus on the result. But there are plenty of things where like, if you want to accomplish something, it does not matter how it's done. You want to finish it, right? Like, and it blows my mind that like we kind of gloss over how you should do something because like there's how-tos or this, like, it doesn't matter how you do it. The matter, like, we need to put far more emphasis on like the completion and doing things and to like get to an end state and complete something. Like that's how we live in a lot of our lives. And like, but we don't do that in other places. It drives me crazy how like we think being a results driven individual, and I'm not saying like, again, 1000%, like I only care about those results, but like there does need to be more emphasis on like the goal at hand and finishing and completing that goal.
Yeah. And I guess some like closing words that we can say is, I think society kind of points you in the direction of going through the process, and like we were kind of discussing with prescriptions and why they don't work. And when you kind of go down that route, like you kind of mentioned, the process, the how-to, the journey becomes the God, and you lose sight on like what you're actually trying to accomplish, like what you truly want. And that is inherently the issue with these kind of things. And yeah, it is kind of arbitrary, but I to me, it makes crystal clear sense. And it does take some time to kind of unpack some of these things. And hopefully, I think we're going to be able to have some interesting discussions down the line. But I think this was a pretty good start for where we wanted to take this. And
I think so too.
I think there's a lot of other like topics and discussions that we can have. And I know some friends are interested in maybe having a wider conversation with us. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to kind of continuing this on with you. And yeah, any closing words here?
Likewise, yeah. Like, subscribe, smash that like button.
Dude, I will never, I will never say that. Oh my God. You will never catch me saying that, seriously.
That's what I'm here for. That's what I'm here for. But I think to wrap here, like, I think in summation of like what I was trying to say, and I think you as well, is like, I think you want to figure out things that you are genuinely sincere about. Find a destination where that sincerity is truly evoked and comes like very natural. And again, to shout out, one of our favorites, Kapil Gupta, is like the destination then creates the avenue, right? Like if you care about something as passionately and when you attack it with sincerity, like you will do whatever it takes. It does not matter the how-tos and the avenue will the avenue will present itself. But the two things you need to do before you get to that point is finding this thing that you are sincere about, or finding something you're incredibly passionate about, and finding like, why am I doing this? What do I want to get to? What do I want to get out of this? And once you find those two things, that avenue is then presented to yourself. It comes natural, right? And so, yeah, those are my,
yeah.
I'm sure we'll talk about
No, I mean, that's a great conclusion there. And I think it's a good segue into kind of some future conversations. But yeah, if you kind of hung on this long for the audience, we really appreciate it. And yeah, I think we got a lot more coming here. So stay tuned. And yeah,